How's it going, everyone? I'm Evan.
I'm Boschkeem.
And we're the MTG guys, coming at you with some fresh Commander content. Starting with our first video, 9 of the 99.
So this is a concept we've been working on for a minute. It's just, we're going to talk about not the whole list. Nobody cares what lands you run, what staples you run. We want the 9 keystone cards in any commander list that make the deck.
So these are your niche cards, maybe your win conditions, your engines, things that make your deck unique to what it is, and also these are the reasons why you play and win the game.
Yeah, and episode 1, it's been cooking up for a while, right? These are 5 of our personal decks that we've been tinkering with for years at this point, that we've been optimizing. They're not CDH, but they're pretty darn high powered.
And these are, tuned decks that are very fun to play, and maybe they have some creative deck building, and we're just trying to give you a new perspective on how to build a deck, and hopefully we can share that with you. Starting with our first video and our first set of commanders, here we go. Let's kick off the series with our spiciest commander, Gyome Master Chef. He is a ridiculously fun commander who seems underwhelming at first glance. This is perfect for staying under the radar as we develop our board. He starts out with a pretty sweet engine, creating food tokens at the beginning of each end step based on the number of non-token creatures that enter the battlefield under your control this turn. This is the ability where you're going to build the deck around. He also comes with some great interaction, being able to make your own creatures indestructible by sacrificing a food, or tap down your opponent's aggressive attackers before combat. So let's dig into the most important 9 of the 99 for Gyome Master Chef. Let's get into the fuel for the deck, starting with Reassembling Skeleton. This creature is a great blocker, it's great sack fodder, and it's going to be generating several food tokens as many times as we can get them in the graveyard. Cauldron Familiar, on the other hand, is not going to be netting us food tokens, but giving us as many Enter the Battlefield triggers, Artifact Death triggers, and its own Drain triggers every single time we get it in the graveyard. Now those cards won't be good without our supporting artifacts. Academy Manufacturer is going to give us a clue and a treasure every time a food will enter the battlefield under our control, which several are going to be entering at the beginning of each end step. And Cloudstone Curio is going to allow us to keep having fuel to replay more cards to get more food tokens. And yes, I know food tokens seem kind of lackluster, but I'm telling you, clues and treasures are not. Cloudstone Curio also gives us some sweet interaction at instant speed. Using Cauldron Familiar's ability, you can sacrifice a food while he's in the graveyard, return him to the battlefield, triggering Cloudstone Curio and being able to bounce another creature to your hand. It also works pretty well with Reassembling Skeleton, paying 1 and a black to do the same thing. Now this is really good against exile target removal, where Gyome can't make himself indestructible, or during board wipes, where you want to maybe return your important creatures to your hands, and then Cauldron Familiar and Reassembling Skeleton will go back to your graveyard. Okay, so why do we need these food tokens? Well, 1, we can play Nettle Cyst or Cranial Plating and have a bunch of artifacts on the battlefield. Yes, they don't really do a whole lot, but they're going to make our commander huge. And he has Trample, he has the ability to give himself indestructible, so he's going to be able to blow out your opponents with commander damage. We can use Krark Clan Ironworks, also known as KCI, to generate a ton of mana. This is going to help us recast Gyome if he ends up dying, or give us a bunch of mana to play several of our other cards. And one other thing is that this is an artifact sack outlet that will help us blow out the board with a card like Marionette Master to hopefully end the game. And the last, but significantly not least, we have Chatterfang Squirrel General, and he is an absolute powerhouse in this deck because you are making so many tokens, you are going to get even more tokens with him, and he's going to be removal. Not only is he going to do all of those things, but he also can be a finisher using an honorable mention of Pitiless Plunderer to kind of generate a combo that's going to help us take out our opponents in an alternative way.
Coming up next is one of my personal decks, which is helmed by Minn, Wily, Illusionist. This deck likes to draw cards to make illusions that get scary big really fast, and when they die, no biggie, let's just cheat out some big blue permanents into play. Minn is held back by only being able to make 1 illusion per turn, so the goal of the deck is to get around that clause by drawing 2 cards on each opponent's turn as well. We win by either swinging out or by a combo victory I'm going to go over in just a second. And I know we said we weren't going to be going over staples in these lists, but it's so hard not to mention Consecrated Sphinx and how insane the card is with Minn. With this card, you get to make an illusion on everybody's turn, so if you untap with it, you've got 8 extra cards in hands with 4 extra illusions, and you can just start going off from there. The next card we're talking about is Teferi's Ageless Insight. We care about this card because it doubles every single one of our draws in a deck that wants to draw 2 cards and not 1 card. It helps us make an illusion on every player's turn with our 1 mana instant draw 1s. Masquid Nexus allows us to turn each of our creatures into illusions, so you can get Minn death triggers when any one of your creatures dies, including the 2/2 token that you can put out with the Nexus, making an illusion. Phantasmal Image is an insane rate for a clone, being only 2 mana to copy any creature. It also keeps the illusion subtype, so when it dies, we get the Minn trigger. It's important to note that our illusions just have massive power, but their toughness stays 1. So with Tetsuko Umezawa Fugitive, all of our illusions become unblockable for just 2 mana. Mutavault lets us have an illusion on a land, which is just a free roll. In a deck that wants to draw as many cards as we do, Counterbalance is an insane stacks piece that has opponents questioning whether or not casting their spell and risking it getting countered is worth it, just for us to draw another card and have the top of our library reset. Perplexing Test is a 5 mana board wipe at instant speed that allows us to keep all of our illusion tokens. The last card I'm going over for this deck is Maloku the Clouded Mirror. This card lets us bounce our own lands to make illusions, which we can then sack to put those lands back into play. So it's an infinite combo with Ashnod's Altar, makes infinite mana. But another layer to that is if you're playing the land Sunscorched Desert, you can bounce it and then replay it infinite times to kill the entire table.
Coming in with our third deck, we've got Silas Renn, Secret Adept, and Toggo, Goblin, Weaponsmith. These are Grixis partner commanders that are going to help us create an insane amount of value using landfall triggers to create rock tokens. Now, these rock tokens can be used as generic artifacts to help us get some value using other cards, or we can use those rock tokens with Silas Renn and throw them at our opponent's creatures for death touch damage. So let's get into how we're going to use these rocks to our advantage. Starting with Idol of Oblivion, every single time we make a rock token, we're going to get to draw a card. And this card is so good because it comes down for just 2 mana. And later in the game, if you want a 10-10, you can blow out some mana and really get the game going. Now we can also use Ethereum Astrolabe, which isn't quite as good as Idol of Oblivion as far as using our rocks, but it also is going to let us sacrifice other artifacts that we might want to put into the graveyard, and we could bring those back with Silas Renn anyway. Now, Goblin Welder is another card that's going to help us recur our artifacts from the graveyard, so if you want to sacrifice maybe a little bit of a bigger artifact from Ethereum Astrolabe, we can just tap Goblin Welder, sacrifice a rock, and reanimate that artifact just from the graveyard back to the battlefield. Even though our rocks are very expendable, we can stretch our value by keeping them around. Using cards like Gyome or Aether Grid, we can tap 2 rocks or 2 other artifacts to deal 1 damage to anything. So we can ping off people's mana dorks, their low health creatures, even finish off the last few points of damage. Or we can use cards like Shimmer Dragon, where we're going to get to tap 2 artifacts and draw a card. So this is going to allow us to use maybe 2, 4, 6 rocks to draw 1, 2, or 3 cards a turn, and it gives itself hexproof. Every deck should have a card that's going to help it in a pinch. We have Reprocess, which is going to let us draw a ton of cards by sacrificing artifacts, creatures, and lands. So we can really dig for more answers to help hopefully finish out the game, or to answer what our opponent has to say. Yes, our deck has a great engine, but we need to use it in order to finish the game. Since Silas Renn has recursion on our commander, I think it was best to build a win condition that are artifact base. So we have Thopter Assembly and Time Sieve, which is an infinite turn combo, given that at the beginning of your upkeep, Thopter Assembly is still around, you're going to make 5 Thopters, tap Time Sieve, sacrifice those 5 Thopters, and rinse and repeat. However, we can also use Time Sieve to sacrifice rocks to take extra turns if we need to stall the game out a little bit longer, or if we need some flyers, we can drop Thopter Assembly and have some units to block. Alright, and I like having an alternate win condition, so we're slotting in Brutaclad Telker Engineer in order to turn our rocks and maybe treasure tokens or other tokens into construct tokens using his ability and several construct generators in the deck. This is going to allow us to swing out at our opponents for an insane amount of damage.
The next commander we're going over is Valki Gotta Lies or Tibalt Cosmic Imposter, but really it's Tibalt Cosmic Imposter. This deck is a theft deck where I try to turbo out Tibalt with all the fast mana in the game, and then I use his abilities to generate card advantage and to disrupt my opponents. The deck plays all the fast mana it can, from Jeweled Lotus to Justice's Will, but none of these cards made the 9 of the 99. The first card that does, however, is Contamination. This is a stack piece that disrupts everybody's mana, but it doesn't matter, because if Tibalt's out, I can use mana of any color to cast cards exiled with him. The sacrifice clause also can be easily avoided by just casting other people's bad creatures and then sacrificing them. Scheming Symmetry is a really cool tutor that allows me and an opponent to tutor a card, but it's to the top of the library. So with Tibalt's first ability, I get to exile those cards and play them. This can be an interesting piece of politics, or if an opponent doesn't put 2 and 2 together, you can just blow them out of the water and exile their best card. Itali is the next card that deals with casting cards from the top of people's library, but except with him, you can do it for free. He's pretty much just a better version of Tibalt's best ability, his +2. Continuing on with this theft theme, we're going to be talking about Gonti, Lord of Luxury. With him, we get to exile a card of target player's library face down, so we can blow them out of the water with a counterspell or removal they didn't expect us to have. Also, he has Death Touch, and our commander is a Planeswalker. People don't want to swing into a Planeswalker when we have a Death Touch creature, so he can be valuable protection for Tibalt. Next up is Fevered Suspicion. So with all that mana, you can either cast Tibalt, or you can turbo out this card, which allows you to cast the top spell of each opponent's library. So there's no misses, you're not hitting any lands, and you get to do it again on the next upkeep for free. Sire of Insanity is a mean card that forces every player to discard their hand at the beginning of each end step. But with Tibalt out, you get to generate advantage with his +2 ability, so you're still furthest ahead. One of the problems playing a Planeswalker as your commander is that creature-based decks are just going to swing at him. So to prevent this, we play the card Silent Arbiter that prevents us or Tibalt from getting Alpha Striked at from a ton of creatures, and it has a 1/5 body with a big butt to block with. So this deck is going to have tons and tons of mana, and what's a better spell to dump it all into than Insurrection? It's a haymaker that was played earlier on in the format. It's kind of slow for now, but you're still going to be able to take controls of everybody's creature and swing out for a big attack. The last card I'm going to talk to you guys about today is Prosper Tomebound. This card generates insane mana advantage with our commander when we play lands from exile or cast any spell from exile. It also generates card advantage and is a Death Cut creature for just 4 mana. It's one of the best cards in this deck.
And last but not least, we have Grixis commander, Sedris the Traitor King. This commander is all about reanimating and cheating out big creatures from the graveyard, having them get haste, swinging in big, and they exile at the beginning of the next end step. Well, at least that's what the card text says. However, we're going to build this deck in a way that defies the rules of the game. We're going to try and keep these creatures out longer than the rules intended. In order to break the game's rules, we need a couple of cards, starting with Obeka, Brute Chronologist, and Sundial of the Infinite. These are both cards that are going to allow us to end our turn at the beginning of the end step when Unearth triggers. This will allow us to break the Unearth triggers, and the creatures will just stick around for good. We can also do this with Thassa, Deep Dwelling. She's going to exile a creature at the beginning of the end step, which is going to allow us to exile an unearthed creature and bring it back to the battlefield as if it had never been unearthed. Because our creatures have haste, we can also use a card like Teferi's Veil to allow our unearthed creatures to phase out at the end of combat. That means when they phase back in, they're going to be good to go. Sneak Attack has 2 uses in this deck. One, that we're going to cheat our creatures from our hand into play, attack with them, use their abilities. At the beginning of the end step, we're going to have to sacrifice them. But then they go into the graveyard, allowing us to unearth them again. Or we can skip the unearth part, cheat them into play, swing with them, whatever we need to do, and at the end step, we can save them just like we would an unearthed creature. It is crucial to deck building that you give yourself flexibility and alternative options, because you never know what's going to go wrong. So maybe you can't get Sneak Attack out. Maybe your graveyard got exiled. Well, we're going to slot in Heartless Summoning into this deck to allow us to cast our big creatures instead of having to cheat them out, and they're going to cost 2 less. Yes, they're going to get -1/-1, but that is way better than not having any creatures at all. Flame Shadow Conjuring also slots nicely into this deck because you're going to be able to make multiple copies, token copies with haste of the creatures that you're cheating in, of that you're casting, just for a single red. And those creatures are going to stick around when you end the turn with Obeka or with Sundial of the Infinite. And of course, we need to bring out the big guns. We have Flayer of the Hatebound and Terror of the Peaks to really amp up our game. Flayer of the Hatebound, every time we unearth or reanimate a creature from the graveyard, we're going to be blasting them with damage, and Terror of the Peaks is going to do exactly the same thing. These are the core cards of Sedris, but that means that you can slot the deck with any fatties, any big cost creatures, enter the battlefield effects, or really anything else that you want. You can put budget cards into it, you could amp it up and put some dollars into it, but anyway, these are the core cards that are super important for this deck, and they're really going to help you succeed. These have been this episode's commanders for 9 of the 99. Please let us know down below what you would like to see, what you did like, what you didn't like. But if you did like what you saw, feel free to give us a subscribe, hit the thumbs up below, and thank you all again.